Morning guys, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. Out here at the cabin today I've got some better ambient light. It's actually attached to the camera. I'm hoping that that's going to give us enough light to film in this cabin as we go without sacrificing the traditionalism of the oil lanterns and things like that in here. I don't want to hook electricity up out here to run lighting if I don't have to, and have the generator running and things like that in the background if we can keep from it. What I wanted to do this morning was I'm just hooking up, we're heating up some hot water here on a transient stove with just an open top stove grill situation in my bush pot so I can have some hot chocolate. And I wanted to discuss with you guys for a minute just my humble opinion on survival. And I think that survival is a term that's used very loosely in our community nowadays. And I also think that it is used in the wrong context a lot of times. And I've watched a few videos lately where people discuss survival, and I've talked to a lot of people on different discussion boards and on Around the Cabin and things like that, and we'll talk more about Around the Cabin here in a little bit. And I wanted to discuss my opinion on survival. If you go back to 2008, and I'm not sure if the videos are even still up, but if you are a Pathfinder Phase 1 student and you get the DVDs that come with Phase 1, you'll see a video in those DVDs where I'm sitting beside a fire in the wintertime out in the woods and I'm making a spear. And I'm having a conversation to Phase 1 students about my opinion of the word survival. I've never really liked the word survival. I've fallen into the trap lately myself of using it more often than I like it to be used. I think that people misunderstand survival in a lot of ways. I'm building my survival kit. Are you talking about survival or are you talking about bushcraft? To me, survival is the immediate or imminent threat of life and death in a wilderness scenario. When I say immediate, I mean within 24 hours. Within the next 2 minutes to the next 24 hours, my life could be on the line. That's a survival scenario to me. Longer term, or in a more urbanized environment, if you're homeless and you have nowhere to live and you have to live on your own hook, very much like the hobos of the 60s and 70s, where you are eating out of soup cans, scrounging for food, sleeping, under trees with a wool blanket or some type of a sleeping bag, sleeping under the bridge next to Walmart. That is a everyday survival scenario. Those type people are in a survival scenario every day because every day can mean life and death to them, or every day can mean where's my next meal going to come from? Where's my next cup of water going to come from? Where's my next cup of coffee going to come from? Where am I going to sleep tonight? How cold is it going to be? Am I going to be able to stay warm? Can I start a fire where I'm at? Am I in an area, if I start a fire, I'm going to be noticed? Those type of people don't like to leave a big footprint as far as where they're at, where they're camping, where they've been. And I'll give you a little story in reference to that real quick, if you'll bear with me for a minute, that kind of opens up a little bit of a light bulb in your head to homeless type survival. And I have a buddy of mine who's a student of the Pathfinder system. I'm going to leave him unnamed in this video because he is an undercover homicide detective in the state of Illinois. He was completing his Phase 1 training of the Pathfinder system, which required him to build a personal space with a semi-permanent structured shelter, a fire pit, and things like that where he could conduct his training. And he had a very hard time finding something like that in suburban Chicago, Illinois. So he chose an area that was basically just a city square block of woods that was in the middle, really, of town. And he set up his shelter there, and he set up his stuff to do his Phase 1. And he told me that several times when he went into that area to practice his Phase 1 training, he had to kick homeless people out of his shelter because they had taken his shelter. They had found that permanent or semi-permanent type shelter in the woods and inhabited it to affect their survival. They have to beg, borrow, and steal for what they have. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's the situation that you're in, but that's a different type of survival than what we typically talk about nowadays as far as wilderness survival. So I want you to kind of differentiate between the two, and I want to kind of open the heads up and open the light bulbs up on some people so that we understand what we're really talking about. Now, survival in a wilderness scenario, to me, is going to be very dependent on your training and skill level, because if you don't leave a proper game plan, you're not carrying the proper equipment, you don't know where to put that equipment on your person or in your kit, and you don't have the right equipment, then that can lead to a survival scenario much quicker than someone who has the proper training, the proper kit mentality, the proper mentality of how and where to carry their gear on their body. And that brings us to our next discussion. I think that to truly be in a survival scenario, something dramatic has to happen. A, I have to lose my kit. In other words, my backpack has to be lost completely from me. So I don't have my kit. I don't have my kit essentials with me, except for what's on my person. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. There's a very good video. Vietnam Bro did a very good video. He's a little bit boisterous, but he did a very good video about this particular concept of what I'm talking about right now. So something traumatic has to happen to put you in that situation. Or you have to have fallen into cold water, or something has had to happen to you that's gotten you to the point of either hyperthermia or hypothermia within a very short amount of time to put you in that survival mentality mode. And depending on what you have with you, depends on how severe that survival situation really becomes. If I am walking down the trail on a day hike and I have my 10-piece kit, in other words, I have everything that I need to start fire, boil water, create a microclimate that will protect me from the elements, and I'm dressed properly, I've left a game plan, and all of those types of things are in place, and I twist an ankle and I can't get out tonight, and I've got to spend the night here, it should be no more than an inconvenient camping trip for me. On the other side of the coin, if I've left a decent game plan with someone and I have the proper kit items with me, and something happens where I stumble and hurt myself to the point where maybe I can't get out on my own and I have to wait for help, if I've left that game plan, I shouldn't be there any more than 72 hours to maybe 4 days before someone comes to rescue me. And if I can't signal for rescue properly, if I'm in an area where I have cell phone service and I can call someone, or if I have the proper kit and kit mentality, again, it's inconvenient, painful camping. It's not truly a survival scenario because it's not necessarily life and death unless that injury has caused something to happen that's going to cause imminent death. I have cut something or ruptured something that's going to cause internal bleeding, or I have a compound fracture with an exposed bone that's prominent to infection. Something's going to have to be dramatic to make it a survival scenario. So I think when people say I'm building a survival kit or I'm building my survival bag, that's a misnomer. Because in a survival situation, you probably aren't going to have that in the truest sense of the word. Now, are you building an emergency kit? Absolutely. And the 10-piece kit was really set up to be an emergency kit, not a survival kit. And I've been guilty myself of calling it a survival kit. I've issued pamphlets in waterproof format and let them be called building a survival kit. Without a doubt, I'm guilty of the same thing. But I think that we have to think back and get to the root cause or the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is, if something has happened to me that's so traumatic that I am in a survival scenario, I'm more than likely not going to have my kit, or something very dramatic has had to have happened to me. I've been attacked by a bear and, things have been destroyed. I've been injured. That's a survival type scenario to me. Inconvenient camping is completely different, and that's what your emergency kit is for. So going back to what I think you should have in a survival scenario, I think you need to understand that what you have on your person all the time when you walk out of the house to go to the woods or to go to recreate or whatever the case may be, that is your survival kit. And you could be bushcrafting, you could be camping, you could be hunting, you could be hiking, you could be doing a lot of things, but it can turn into a survival scenario in the blink of an eye. But understand that you may not have the complete contents of your kit in a true survival scenario. Okay, so let me just kind of move this stuff out of the way here and get myself some hot chocolate poured. So for the sake of our discussion, we need to understand and get it clear in our mind what a survival scenario really is and how do we prepare for that scenario. And I think that we need to understand that in an extreme emergency, I like a little bit of chocolate with my water. We have to understand that what's on our person is probably what we're going to have in an extreme emergency. So thinking about that, what do we put on our person or carry on our person on a daily basis that will help affect our survivability, and that it will help control our core body temperature and take care of us and take care of our needs for the short term if we've left a good game plan. Most of the time you should have a knife strapped to your hip, so the likelihood of losing that knife are very, very slim. You should have a ferrocerium rod in your pocket. You should have some type of folding knife in your pocket. You should probably have some type of cordage or length of cordage in your pocket, even if it's a short length. And those types of things will help you in the long run for a true survival scenario. But we also need to understand that the likelihood of being in a true survival scenario, and like I said, we throw that word around so easily, is probably less than being struck by lightning if we are prepared. If we make sure that we have the proper kit, we use due diligence when traveling through the wilderness, we've left a proper game plan. Again, barring traumatic injury or an incident of some sort, we're probably not going to get ourselves in a survival scenario. And that comes back to training. And we need to make sure that we always train so that we avoid survival scenarios unless they are unavoidable. Obviously, if you trip and fall over something and you break your femur and you have an exposed bone from a compound fracture sticking through the skin, you got bigger problems than what you got in your kit. So understand that about what a real survival scenario boils down to. Now, the other discussion I want to have as far as survival goes is primitive skills. There's been a lot of discussion lately on places like around the cabin, and we'll talk about that again more in just a few minutes, like I said, about the importance of primitive skills and knowing primitive skills in a survival scenario. And I would say this, I think that primitive skills are very important to understand and to own. And when I'm talking about primitive skills, I'm talking about everything from improvising a knife, to making fire, to building shelter, to disinfecting water. Anything that I have to use natural material to recreate, in my mind, is a primitive skill. And that's my definition of a primitive skill. If I recreate a modern item with something from natural material, that becomes a primitive skill. So it's good to understand that as well. Now, if I've got my knife strapped to my person, and I have a ferro rod in my pocket, and probably a lighter in my pocket, especially if I'm a smoker, the chances of me needing primitive fire are slim to none. Does that mean it's never going to happen, and I shouldn't own the skill? Absolutely not. But what it does mean is that there's other skills that I could better spend my time learning and understanding and becoming more knowledgeable in than primitive fire. Because I shouldn't be in a position where I have to make primitive fire unless somebody steals my pants. And that's not going to happen. So, well, I shouldn't say it's not going to happen. It's way, way unlikely to happen. That you would be caught without your pants. And that's what would have to happen to lose your knife and your ferro rod and your lighter, is somebody would have to steal you or remove your pants from your person. Okay, so I'm sorry I'm getting off here a little bit and I'm getting on a tangent. I apologize about that. This is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart right now. In my mind, the most important primitive skill, and this is going to be a very controversial subject. If you ask 9 out of 10 people, even people that know a lot about the wilderness, if you ask 9 out of 10 people what's the most important primitive skill that you can possibly know, 95% of them would tell you fire. And I disagree with that. The reason I disagree with that is for exactly what I said. For me to lose the ability to make fire much easier than friction fire would mean that I have to have lost my ferro rod and lost a lighter. The ferro rod's going to work wet or dry no matter what. The lighter is susceptible to moisture and cold and running out of fluid. But a ferrocerium rod's got 20,000 strikes in it. If I've left a good game plan, and we're talking 3-4 days, I'm going to be able to affect fire if I've trained myself and spent the dirt time properly to learn what tinder sources are combustible, what to carry on my person in my pack to help affect combustion and things of that nature. Shelter is the one thing that's very hard for me to guarantee. Now, a container, I may not be able to put a container on my body, although I could strap a water bottle to my belt. But then I'm walking around looking like Batman. I've got a belt pouch, a canteen, a knife, a multi-tool. You know, and I've got a little bit too much around my waist, and it starts to get ridiculous. In the eastern woodlands, there's plenty of water. If I'm only going to be there for 72 hours to 4 days, if I've left a good game plan, I know what's going on, and help is on the way, or help is going to come, I'm going to drink whatever I have to or not drink at all for at least a couple of days, and that's not going to hurt me. I can go 3 days without water, depending on the severity of the environment and situation, without too much detriment. So I'd rather drink the water if I find a source, no matter what it is, even if it's a mud puddle, than to not have water. So the container is an issue in an emergency kit, but in a true survival scenario may not be such a big issue, because I can find something to drink if I have to in the eastern woodlands. Now, I may not be able to crawl to a water source very easily if I'm injured, but again, injuries are a whole different form of survival scenario, and your well-being and self-aid is the number one paramount thing that you have to think about in any scenario. So if you have a container and you have a canteen of water, then you're going to be that much better off. But a shelter is the one thing that I can't really effectively carry on my person that I can guarantee, for the most part, is not going to be lost. If I have my 10-piece kit in my backpack and it's sitting in a canoe and the canoe spills over, chances are I'm not going to have the contents of that pack. So I'm going to have, again, what's on my body. Now, even if I am diligent enough to carry a trash bag in my pocket every day, which I can tell you now I'm not, and 90% of the people out there probably are not, at the best case scenario, I have rain gear, I have a temporary tarp, or I have a ground cloth. Without fire, I still cannot control my body's core temperature very easily in a cold weather environment. So I need that knowledge of how to construct a shelter from natural material. And for that reason alone, I think that shelter is your most important primitive skill that you can possibly own, above all else. Because that will protect your body's core temperature, and that is the one thing that you cannot carry on your person very easily effectively. You can carry it in your kit when you combine it with fire, because you can carry emergency bivvies, emergency space blankets, all of those types of things. But if I have my kit on my body, chances are I've got a lot better shelter than my emergency gear. Emergency gear in the 10-piece kit was centered around people going out into the wild for day hikes and things of that nature, where they're not carrying a full-blown backpack that has a huge semi tarp in it, or an oilskin tarp and a sleeping bag, and all of those goodies that you would use if you planned on being out there overnight. The 10-piece kit was set up as an emergency kit for, I wasn't planning on getting stuck out here, but I am. Now I've got these 10 pieces of kit to suffice me until I get rescued. And many of them are geared toward signaling for rescue, fire, multicolored bandanas in orange, space blankets that are orange, all of those things that are headlights that will flash, a compass that has a mirror on it so I can signal for rescue. Lots of things in the 10-piece kit are geared towards signaling for rescue, and the 10-piece kit was developed to be able to meet all of your short-term needs, but not necessarily your long-term needs. And that's the difference that I think people don't get with survival scenarios. People talk about wilderness living as a survival scenario. It's not. If you're in a wilderness living scenario, you probably chose to be there. Or something happened to you so traumatic and so out of this world that it was a 1 in a billion shot that it ever happened to you. A plane crashed and you survived in the middle of the mountains somewhere, and now you've got to live until someone comes to find you. Still yet, your best bet is to stay near the wreckage, because that's what they're going to find first. Yes, you may be there longer than 3 or 4 days. You may have to live primitively off the land in some aspects, but again, I say, shelter is the most important option in that scenario. To be able to keep yourself sheltered from the environment and be able to start a fire and be able to obtain drinkable water. Sorry I got off on a tangent, guys, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understood my mentality when it comes to true survival scenarios, the 10-piece emergency kit, or the 10 C's of survivability, and long-term sustainability, which is what we're talking about with this cabin. I've chose to be here. I've brought in supplies to be sustainable. That is not a survival scenario. If I go 5 miles into the wilderness area and I'm checking my trap line and I fall through the ice and I'm not properly prepared, now it's a survival scenario. That's the difference. So what I want to tell you guys was, there is a show called Around the Cabin on the internet. You can go to www.aroundthecabin.com. It is a live hosted show through Skype where guests are on the show and they answer questions in a chat room. And you can sign into that and log into the chat room very easily. All you have to do is enter a name in there and select either Java or HTML or whatever or Flash, and it will let you into that chat room, and you can ask questions in that chat room of the hosts of the show. On Wednesday night of this week, myself and Chris Kane from Chris Kane Survival in the UK are going to host that show, and we'll be there to answer questions and talk about and discuss survival. That's what we're going to be there for, is to discuss the things that we talked about today and what our mentality and feelings are on survival situations, what it really means to be in survival mode, and the gear and kit that you're going to have and what you're going to have to utilize in that situation. So I would encourage you to go to www.aroundthecabin.com. Sign in on Wednesday night, I believe it's at 8 o'clock, for Dave Canterbury and Chris Kane from Chris Kane Survival in the UK. We'll be on that show live. You can come in there, ask us questions, have discussions with us. You know, any questions that you would want to ask on a YouTube video that I may not be able to answer in 2 words or 3 words or a sentence because of restrictions, I can answer in 2 or 3 paragraphs, and so can Chris Kane on this live broadcast. So I invite you to join us at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night, aroundthecabin.com. Rich, the Ridge Runner, runs that site. It's a very, very nice site. I would encourage you to go look around there anyway and see some of the other hosted shows and events that are on there. My instructor, Jamie Burley, has a weekly radio show or weekly live video broadcast show on there every Sunday night at 9 o'clock. I was on there with him last night. Very enjoyable show. Very good way to get the discussions rolling. A lot better than discussion boards and forums in a lot of ways, because you get immediate answers to your questions and you see what other people are talking about at the same time. I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School. I thank you for joining me for this video. I'm sorry if it bored you guys and I got a little bit of a soapbox, but I appreciate everything you do for me, for my school, for my family, for all my sponsored affiliates, instructors, and friends, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.